everybody, to this week's episode. We really appreciate you joining us. This podcast really shows us how we can all learn, live, and thrive off of each other. By sharing our knowledge through our conversations, we will impart some knowledge whilst learning ourselves how to progress even further. Here is your host.
Hello and Merry Christmas, and welcome to Around the World Today, Series 4, Episode 15. It's Christmas 2021, and I'd like to take this moment to wish you a Merry Christmas from everyone here at Real Ontario and from my podcast Around the World Today. We're going to start a little different because I'm going to actually play you an orchestra music, and I'm going to play this a couple of times because it's one of my favourite hymns, and it's in the bleak midwinter, and it's an orchestra accompaniment. So we're going to start off with this, and we'll be back just after this. Wasn't that just awesome? And there was no words, so it was allowing you time to think and to contemplate. Anyway, I do like that hymn, and I do suggest that you go and read on the blog the words of that hymn. Contemplate them. Think about them. But anyway, it's Christmas, people. Aren't we all looking forward to it? Well, this Christmas, maybe some of us aren't, because we're getting together with family members that, let's just say, we don't want to get together with. So, it could be fun, shall we say. But anyway, one of these traditions of Christmas is Father Christmas, but who is he? The University of Nottingham's Theology Department have actually published a video about this that I'm going to share with you on this podcast. Here we go.
Well, the story begins in the 4th century with a Turkish bishop called Nicholas. There were 3 young girls who were about to be sold into prostitution, and he put money for them through the window. And some of the versions of the story, the money falls into their shoes, and they were saved. Hence the association of St. Nicholas with gift giving. He gets the association with children from rescuing 3 young boys from death in a tub. And he was the saint of sailors, so his cult spread all the way around through Europe. In England, we had Sir Christmas or Father Christmas. And he didn't really give presents. He wore a great big green bough or garland over his head. He represented Christmas festivity, wassail cups. He was in the mummers' plays in the Middle Ages and beyond. The beard seems to be there from the beginning. Saints in the Eastern Church often have beards, as Orthodox priests do today. And the Old English version of him tended to have a beard. He tended to be quite whiskery. He almost represented the old year. And of course, in Charles Dickens's story, A Christmas Carol, the ghost of Christmas past in John Leech's illustration is bearded as well. And of course, he isn't necessarily wearing red for a very long while. In fact, it's not really until the Coca-Cola advertisement of the early 1930s by a Scandinavian artist that he gets his orthodox costume, fully red, with the black boots, the buttons, and all that. For us now, he's associated with children. And that, of course, is very much the Santa Claus figure from the Netherlands and Germany and so on, which has united with our Father Christmas. Father Christmas is all about what we might call a threshold, a liminal space between believing and not believing. And there is something very beautiful about that. And I think children want to go on believing in elves. Again, something that really only comes in the 19th and early 20th century, this idea of the elves. Again, linked to, we don't know who makes our stuff anymore. It would be much nicer to think that it were elves working under really good conditions in Lapland with Father Christmas. The idea of leaving something for Father Christmas, a glass of sherry, a carrot for the reindeer, all goes back to this idea of gift economy, which was based on the idea that you didn't need money, somebody gave you a gift, you gave somebody else a gift. It was all about giving and receiving, and that's how society worked. And so you make your response to Father Christmas by giving him something back. And of course he enters the house down the chimney, which is very interesting because you might think of that as quite frightening. And for children in particular, the house is often an uncanny space, an eerie space, where they do believe that things might kind of come alive. But Father Christmas seems to be wholly benign, and of course there is this whole tradition of writing your letter for Father Christmas and putting it up the chimney, which I think is quite modern, but is very universal. The chimney then becomes the way in which you send things up and things come down. The Puritans in the 17th century, they tried to ban Christmas because it was seen as a sort of pagan festivity where people got drunk. It wasn't then linked to children at all. It was an adult festival with your friends, more necessary than your family and children. And in fact, in the 17th century, there are all these slightly comic trials of Father Christmas. But he did survive. And of course, the Puritan period ends in 1660 with the restoration of the monarchy, and back comes Father Christmas. Father Christmas is a way in which people invent culture all the time. And that's partly what's so wonderful about Father Christmas. He almost represents make-believe, the whole idea of imagination and creating family culture, family tradition, national tradition. I just wish that we made our Father Christmas customs slightly more public, slightly more charitable, and not quite so focused on the individual home again.
And we're going to ask a question. I actually agree Father Christmas has become too commercialised. The whole idea of what he set out to do, and that's Saint Nicholas, I'm going to let you into a little secret. So the church in the Anglican Communion, in the church in Wales where I was baptised, is named St Jude. Its daughter church is named St Nicholas, and today they are one church and they're named St Nicholas and St Jude. So St Nicholas holds a dear place in my heart as as one of the patrons of the church that is my home church. So yes, and they always say home is where the heart is. But St Nicholas, I like the Netherlands traditions. I've been to the Netherlands in December time, around about St Nicholas Day. It was on the 6th of December in religious terms, and it's such immense that you see the children chasing this man, and he's just giving them sweets, and yeah, there's less commercialised of Christmas, or there was up until recently in Europe, but in America, I've done Christmas in America in 1995 to 96. I was there in 95, and it was, quite. We did get that family time on Christmas Eve, and then Christmas Day it was just my great auntie, her husband, my uncle, who I'm having Christmas dinner with tomorrow, and that was the last time we had Christmas dinner. Oh no, there was another time after, and that was the last time. But Lord help me. Lord graciously help me. But anyway, the question we're going to ask is, did Coca-Cola steal Christmas? Maybe, maybe not. But let's have a listen.
Coca-Cola is one of the most iconic global brands, and people all over the world are familiar with them. This is no small part due to their hugely influential marketing campaigns. The most grandiose of these easily being their Christmas advertisements. It all started in the 1920s and continues up until this day, for almost 100 years. It isn't surprising that many of us remember at least a few of Coca-Cola's TV spots that aired throughout the years. The famous Coca-Cola truck, the Holidays Are Coming song. And let's not forget, the image of Santa Claus that is associated with this festive season is the one depicted in Coke's advertising campaigns. The first time Santa was featured in an ad run by Coca-Cola was in the 1920s. At the time, television was as popular as virtual reality is today. It existed, but was still in its infancy. This was the beginning of what we've come to know as Christmas and Santa Claus. Before that, Old Saint Nick had a totally different image. Santa Claus, Father Christmas, or how he was originally known, St. Nicholas, was a monk believed to be born around 280 CE. Rumored to have given his wealth to the poor, Nicholas became known as the protector of children and sailors. The anniversary of his death on December 6th became a lucky day to get married or make large purchases, like 4K TVs. Because of this, Nicholas kept his popularity and a reputation, especially in the Netherlands. The stories of Sinterklaas, a shortened form of St. Nicolaas, Dutch for St. Nicholas, continued, and when they reached New York, the more familiar Santa Claus started to develop, thanks to the newspaper stories and Christmas shopping and marketing from the malls. But it's not until the 1920s when Coca-Cola decided to use the recently reimagined Santa Claus in their Christmas marketing. Coke had come a long way since its first introduction by John Pemberton, who initially invented a wine coca, cocaine wine. But after Prohibition was passed in Atlanta in 1886, he developed a non-alcoholic version called Coca-Cola. Pemberton sold the drink as a patent medicine which claimed to cure many diseases, including morphine addiction, indigestion, headaches, and impotence. Obviously, all this was backed up by rigorous scientific studies, like the ones performed on the benefits of snake oil. For the next couple of decades after Pemberton's death in 1888, the Coca-Cola Company had started its path to global domination. Of course, there were plenty of company struggles right off the bat. The company was split between different manufacturers. There were buyouts, naming rights, and a bunch of other things you'd expect with a company with this potential. But obviously, it wasn't squabbling between business people that convinced the masses to drink a fizzy brown goo. It was marketing, and Coca-Cola got this right from the very beginning. Being the first company to offer free coupons, the company used mostly smartly dressed young women, often models and celebrities, to sell its drink. Add this to a growing marketplace and plenty of billboards and posters, and the Coca-Cola Company had found its way into the hands of the masses. But by 1920, it was time for the Coca-Cola Company to take on the big guns. The Christmas market. Despite popular belief, Santa Claus in his more modern look was not first used by Coca-Cola, but in fact by White Rock Beverages for their mineral water and ginger ale. But let's face it, it's not about doing it first, it's about doing it best. And once Coca-Cola had got their hands on the big guy in red, nobody else dared touch him. The first Coke Christmas ad featured a sterner-looking Santa, more akin to how he had been portrayed in the artwork of the time by artists like Thomas Nast, who originally envisioned St. Nick in his bright red suit. So, although it wasn't Coca-Cola who created this more modern-looking Santa, they certainly have taken their new mascot to a whole new level and introduced us to some sidekicks along the way. Starting with the polar bears, who were introduced in 1922 in France. This is Coca-Cola doing what it does best. Evoking emotion. In the 30s, Hadan Sundblom took the strict Santa from the previous decade and turned him into the warm, friendly, plump, jolly Santa we associate with Christmas today. Based on Sundblom's neighbor and the imagery of the 1822 poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," this new and improved Santa captured the spirit of Christmas and was used as the standard Santa for all interpretations, from book to film to TV. With this Santa, Coca-Cola had practically glued their brand to Christmas by sending the messages of family, togetherness, joy, and diversity. Coca-Cola was establishing themselves as a lifestyle accompaniment rather than a product, and its marketing carried on this way for years, targeting specific audiences, telling stories, creating nostalgia, and giving experiences. Then they introduced Sprite Boy, a terrifying man-child with a painful-looking bottle cap for a hat, to represent Coca-Cola and Coke being two separate trademarks. Whatever his purpose was, we should just be glad he's not used anymore. Coca-Cola's tradition of bringing the communal feeling and the festive spirit continued for decades, with Sundblom's final version of Santa, created in the 60s, being the standard. Coca-Cola faced a relative rough patch in terms of brand strength in the 80s. Because of some unusual marketing decisions like New Coke and added pressure from competition like Pepsi. To counter this, the 90s saw an incredibly strong comeback, especially with their Christmas marketing. We saw the return of the polar bears promoting a strong sense of togetherness. And showing that no matter how cold it is, Coke is still a good choice of drink. After the polar bears came the Coca-Cola trucks, otherwise known as Christmas caravans.
Then the trucks came over the hill.
These portrayed a new message, that Christmas doesn't arrive until Coke says it does. Up to this day, many say that Christmas doesn't start until they see the Coca-Cola truck advert for the first time. The holidays are coming. It took a century of being ahead of the game in terms of marketing, but it all came together to create a world where Coca-Cola and Christmas are ingrained in people's minds. They've figured out what it means to give people an experience instead of a product. Coca-Cola really is battling on two fronts, the family and community side of Christmas with the polar bears, and the excitement and magic of Christmas with the caravan. Add in some gimmicks like the Bow Bottle and a physical truck tour of the UK, and you can see Coca-Cola's Christmas dominance shows no signs of disappearing anytime soon, even if Pepsi does give it a good go.
I have a few observations to make for Coca-Cola. Now, we're going to play you next a Nativity. I think that's what is there to play as the next, so bear with me. Well, actually, no, that's later on. So, this is the... We all know what happens when you get commercialised. We've all heard the story of Scrooge. Bah humbug! Bah humbug, bah humbug, bah humbug, bah humbug! That's the hymn I've been singing for the last week. Because for me, Christmas doesn't start till midnight anyway. But anyway, so we're going to listen to Scrooge. And we'll sing bah humbug, bah humbug, bah humbug later on. So, here we go. Bah humbug!
One New Year's Eve, people were running around trying to make it somewhere. The stingy old grumpy man, Mr. Scrooge, was looking out the window from his workplace.
What nonsense. All these people running around in the cold. I hate New Year's Eve.
Mr. Scrooge sat at his table and began to check the list of all the people that owed him money. With hesitation, his helper approached him and asked,
Is it possible that I leave a little early today? You know, it's New Year's Eve, and I must buy my son a present. No, you may not, mister. Present? How ridiculous. And why leave it to the last day? You should have bought it earlier.
With great sadness, his helper returned to work. At that very moment, the door knocked. As grumpy as himself, his dog barked at the door. Mr. Scrooge's helper opened the door. His young nephew had come to visit him. He invited him over to the New Year's dinner. But because Mr. Scrooge didn't like New Year's, and he thought that the celebrations were nonsense, once again, like always, he refused to go. After his nephew had left, his door knocked again.
Oh, what now? Leave me alone so I can work.
This time, two men entered and asked if it was possible for him to donate some money to the orphans. Mr. Scrooge refused to give them money.
Go on now. Go to another door. I have no money to throw on the streets.
With great sadness, the men walked out. Later that evening, Mr. Scrooge went home, wore his pajamas, and sat on his couch. And right that moment, some strange things began to happen. Windows and doors began to swing. There were howling noises coming from the door and scary sounds all around. The dog began to bark once again. At first, Mr. Scrooge didn't take any notice of this, but then all of a sudden a ghost appeared right in front of him. Mr. Scrooge had never been so frightened in his whole entire life. The ghost was his friend from work, who had just passed away. With great difficulty, Mr. Scrooge spoke.
You, but how can it be? You died. Go Get away from me. Leave me alone. I haven't done anything wrong.
The ghost's hands and feet were in shackles. He told Mr. Scrooge, due to his selfishness and greediness, he was punished, and that his punishment was to walk around the world in shackles. And so he warned Mr. Scrooge not to make the same mistake he did.
You go and mind your own business. You're dead. There you have it. Okay then. Just wanted to warn you. 3 other ghosts will visit you. One of them will show you your past. The other, your present. And the last one will show you your future life.
Mr. Scrooge acted as if none of this had happened and headed off to bed. Soon after, a light caught his eye. When Mr. Scrooge opened his eyes, a child ghost appeared. It was the ghost from last year's New Year's Eve. Mr. Scrooge was stunned. Now we will take a little trip to the past.
Oh, what's happening? Help!
The ghost took Mr. Scrooge back to his childhood years. And there it was, Mr. Scrooge as a child, with his friends in the schoolyard decorating the tree like a Christmas tree. The kids were having so much fun. You could tell child Mr. Scrooge was very happy. Later on, the ghost took him to his first boss's house when he was a young man. They were having a great time with his boss and his family. Mr. Scrooge's wife was also there. Together they were dancing and having so much fun. And at last, the ghost took Mr. Scrooge back to another New Year's Eve, which was in the past, but later on in his life. His wife began to cry.
Before we used to have so much fun. You used to care for me and love me, but now all you love is money. I have no room in your life anymore. I think we should part.
Not being able to stand the sight of this, Mr. Scrooge asked the ghost to take him back. And suddenly he was home. This time round, a giant green-coloured ghost appeared in front of him. Now Mr. Scrooge was even more scared. It was this year's New Year's ghost.
Come with me. Let's see what's happening this New Year's Eve.
Before he had any time to refuse, he found himself in his helper's home. In his poor helper's home was a very simple dinner table. Mr. Scrooge thought that everyone in the family hated him. Then he saw that this actually wasn't the case. His helper stood up and started to talk.
I want to thank Mr. Scrooge for giving me the opportunity to work and for paying me on time. We are able to eat because of him.
Even though Mr. Scrooge was nasty to his helper at every chance he got, he was amazed at how thankful he was. Later he noticed his helper's sick child. The kid was sitting in his wheelchair at the top corner of the table. He looked thin and sick. Mr. Scrooge was very sad for the child.
This child is very ill and hasn't got much time left.
After hearing this, Mr. Scrooge's sadness grew bigger. Later on, the ghost took him to his nephew's home. All his family was having so much fun eating. They even had an empty seat waiting for him.
Wish Uncle was here with us.
Mr. Scrooge did not expect to see this.
He always thought that his whole family had hated him.
At that moment, the ghost told him that it was time for him to die and revealed 2 kids standing under his jacket. It was a girl and a boy. But with their skinny figures and scary faces, they looked more like 2 old skeletons than kids.
Pay attention to these kids. They represent greedy and unconcerned people. When it is time for you to die, pay special attention to the boy.
The giant green ghost also disappeared. Mr. Scrooge did not quite understand what the ghost was trying to say, but suddenly he startled with the sound of the clock. It was midnight. This time, there appeared a darker and scarier ghost in front of him. This one was the ghost of the future. He brought Mr. Scrooge to his own funeral. People were gathered at his grave in a graveyard. Mr. Scrooge was shocked when he saw his face on his gravestone. He saw that people were talking behind his back, and how they were relieved that he was finally gone. That moment, Mr. Scrooge realized that over the years he had become an even worse person and nobody liked him anymore. People who owed him money were happy with his death. And he saw his helper's son's grave.
Unlike his son's grave was full of flowers.
He could not stand to see it anymore. He asked the ghost to take him back.
Please take me back. Now I understand. I'm going to change the way I live. I'm not going to be that stingy old grumpy man. I promise you.
Suddenly he was home. Luckily, the time wasn't 12 yet. His dog began to bark. Mr. Scrooge noticed it was still that same day. He still had time to change some things. With great happiness, he jumped out onto the street. First, he visited the butcher. He bought a big turkey and asked if he could take it to his helper's home. Then he bought a toy and asked if they could take it to his helper's son. Then he ran and went to his brother's house. He joined the dinner his nephew had invited him to. That night, they all had a great New Year's Eve together. Later on, he made sure his helper's son got the treatment he needed. He treated him as if he was his own son. He helped the poor. He got along with people better and treated them with warmth. He was never rude, selfish, or stingy, and nothing was ever going to be the same.
If you've listened to our Advent run-up, you would have been preparing for Christmas with us. We have looked at Advent as a whole through love, joy, and prayer. We've covered Advent a little bit different through prayer and through talking and what this means and what I feel. And now we're at Christmas, and to me Christmas, the true meaning of Christmas is the Nativity, is Christ and everything that we've been preparing for, and that's me as a Christian, but also, it's in the name Christmas. And we all, even non-religious people who celebrate Christmas, we all try to be good this time of year. And this stems back to me from religious times of when we were more devout as a country. But hey, but anyway, I'm going to play you Deck the Halls next. And here we go.
Hi kids, this is the story of Christmas. There was a woman in a small town named Mary. She was engaged to a good man named Joseph. They were planning a wedding and a future together. So many things to think about. But one day, God sent the angel Gabriel to Mary. He said, "Greetings, favored woman, the Lord is with you." Mary was confused and a little scared. She had no idea what the angel was about to say. We don't see angels that often, right? "Don't be afraid, Mary," the angel told her, "for you have found favor with God. You will have a baby boy, and you will name him Jesus. He will be very great and will be called the Son of God." Mary was afraid because she was not married yet. But she said, "I am the Lord's servant. May everything you have said about me come true." And then the angel left her. Mary was so scared to tell Joseph about what happened. When Joseph knew about this, he was scared too. He wasn't sure about the wedding anymore. But he loved Mary so much and didn't want to hurt her. One night, an angel appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because she will have a son, and you will name him Jesus, because he will be the Savior of all." When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary as his wife. Their plan was back on track, and they were now ready to welcome a special baby into the family. Many exciting things were coming. Mary and Joseph lived in a town called Nazareth, but Joseph was from Bethlehem, known as the city of David. Joseph was a descendant of King David. Yes, that David, the one who killed Goliath the giant. One day, Augustus, the Roman emperor, decreed that a census should be taken. Everyone had to return to their own hometown to register for the census. So Mary and Joseph packed their bags and traveled to Bethlehem. Mary was pregnant, and the time for the baby to be born was quickly approaching. So they started looking around for a place to stay. Because of the census, the whole town was packed, and there was no room available. Finally, after looking all day, they found a place where Mary could have the baby. This place was not a nice hotel or even a guest room. The place they found was a manger. So there were probably some animals around there too. Mary and Joseph really needed a place, so they decided to stay there. On a special night, Jesus was born in Bethlehem during the reign of King Herod. He came to the world as a baby. Joseph and Mary were so happy to have him in their new family. That night, there were shepherds staying in the fields nearby, guarding their flocks of sheep. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of God surrounded them. They were terrified. But the angel told them, "Don't be afraid. I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. Go visit him. You will recognize him by this sign. You will find a baby wrapped snugly in strips of cloth, lying in a manger." Suddenly, the angel was joined by many other angels praising God and saying, "Glory in highest heaven, and peace on earth to those with whom God is pleased." The shepherds were so excited to visit Jesus, so they started packing their bags and began their journey to find this special baby. Let's go to Bethlehem. Let's see this wonderful thing that has happened. Jesus, our Savior, is born. The shepherds hurried to the village of Bethlehem to find Jesus. And they found him there, lying in the manger, just as the angel had told them. They were overjoyed to see the Messiah. After seeing him, they went back to their flocks, praising God for all they had heard and seen. They also shared with many others about what happened. The Messiah was now here on earth. At that time, wise men from the east found about this special event. They were very smart and knew a lot about the stars. One day, they found a special star in the sky. This star showed the way to the newborn king. They wanted to meet this special baby. So, like the pastors, they packed their bags and traveled to Jerusalem. When they got there, they asked, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this. He didn't like the idea about a new king. So Herod called together the priests and teachers of the scripture and asked them, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem," they answered, just like the prophet said, "O Bethlehem, a ruler will come from you, who will be the shepherd for my people." King Herod called the wise men and told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me, so that I can go and worship him too." I don't think King Herod really wanted to worship Jesus. He was jealous and didn't want a new king taking his place. Now the wise men were so close to finding baby Jesus, so they continued their journey to Bethlehem. We don't know exactly how many people were on this journey, but we know they had 3 special gifts for the newborn king: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They traveled a long distance and they were so excited to finally see Jesus. The star guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where Jesus was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. By that time, Jesus wasn't a newborn baby anymore. He lived in a house now. The wise men entered the house and found Jesus there. They quickly bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These were strange gifts for a young boy, but Jesus was more than just a little boy. He was the King and Savior of all, so he received these special gifts. When it was time to leave, they remembered that King Herod was waiting for them. But God warned them in a dream not to return to him, so they went back to their country by another route. Many adventures awaited Jesus. Although this marks the end of the Christmas story, it was in fact just the beginning of a wonderful story of grace. Many years after this,
and that is Christmas. That's the true meaning of Christmas. I've given you 3 stories and traditions of Christmas. Father Christmas, Coca-Cola's commercialized Christmas, and then the true meaning of Christmas: Christ, love, hope, joy, and peace. May you all find this Christmas. From me and the team here at Real Tario, we'd like to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. The tidings we bring to you and your kin. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Now bring us some figgy pudding. Now bring us some figgy pudding. Now bring us some figgy pudding and bring it on.
This week's episode has come to an end. But the fun doesn't have to stop here. If you have